Are you looking for an internet talk radio station for your podcast? Look no further. At the helm of Passionate World Talk Radio are two women that want to provide a spot for you and your podcast to be heard. There are many other places for your podcast, but PWTR has the audience. You will not be disappointed. Our station has been on the internet for the past 16 years. Call us for more information. 484-364-1032 or text Jeannie White, station manager at THECONNECTSHOW@gmail.com for podcast show details.
This episode of the Energy Stoners Cafe is sponsored by Passionate World Talk Radio and Lillian Caldwell. PassionateWorldTalkRadio.com.
Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain.
This episode is an excerpt from my public access TV show, Talk with TQ. Welcome to the Energy Stoners Cafe. My name is Toni Quest, and I'm really happy that you're here. I like to interview the most interesting people I can find on the planet. So grab a cup of coffee, sit down, relax, and listen. You're going to find that these guests are so intriguing, you'll wonder why you didn't know about them before. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Talk with TQ. I'm always so happy when you come, and I appreciate it more than you can imagine. And as promised, I always find the most interesting people I can find on the planet. Tonight, we have again a follow-up interview with Patricia A. Boswell. She is the author of Caregiving with Love and Joy. She's an LPN and she's an MBA. And it seems that those things are working very well for her. And it also works well with regard to the subject of caregiving. Now, last week we ended on the note of the caregiver. So I'm going to ask Patricia some questions about that caregiver. How can the caregiver avoid burnout? What's involved with self-care? And the caregiver often gets very worn out by taking care of their loved one when their loved one has dementia. It is an exhausting, I can attest to this, it's an exhausting and often daunting and unsettling process. But there are ways to get around this, and we're going to ask Patricia about that. I'm going to ask her about that because in my world, she's the expert. I wish she was around a few years ago. So Patricia, caregiver, the caregiver. What is the caregiver and the people that love the caregiver? What do they need to know? What does he or she need to bring to the table?
I like to explain to people that in order for you to be a good caregiver, you have to think about your health first because you don't want to deteriorate and decline. You already know your loved one is going to deteriorate and decline down the road. So you have to be at your best at all times for yourself, for your mental and physical health, because you might have other people around you that are not dependent on you, but still want your love and your time too. So you have to have a balance. So in the book, I talk about self-care and how you need to be exercising. And also I have a program in there for yourself, but also an exercise that you can do with your loved one as you are doing this caregiving. Also, I like to think when you're a caregiver that you have to set the boundaries and the foundation. You never build a house without a foundation, because if you don't put the foundation in, the house is not going to last. It's going to deteriorate and fall apart. And it's the same concept for someone who's caring for a loved one, especially with dementia, because every day could be a different day. So as you're moving forward, always think about self first and then caring for the loved one. But with dementia, it's better to be proactive than reactive. So that's what I say. If you set up, as I talk about in the book, teams and how you're going to work with others. It's not an individual program. You have to be engaged with other people, but you're like the leader for everyone else. Everyone's going to follow your lead. And it's very important that you make sure as you're programming all of this, that you're putting in the time for yourself.
So what kind of situations, I don't want to say what someone can expect. I do know that every situation when it comes to dealing with a loved one who has dementia, from what I've seen and experienced, it tends to be very individual. Now, you talk a little bit about burnout. And what I've observed, as a lay person and the person that's been the caregiver, is often I'll be very blunt. I was very surprised by who would not help me, by who in the family actually declared that they weren't going to help. And what I've observed in other people's families, it always tends to fall on the shoulders of one person. It doesn't matter how big the family is. Have you observed this too?
I have observed it in both ways, where an individual is the caregiver and people want to help, but they're so bent out of shape about having help that when they really need help, there's no help around because it wasn't planned for help. And then I've seen where people have not wanted to help. And that's why I think it's very important that you start and know who your team will be down the road. So you might not need 5 people in the beginning, but you might only need 2 people. And then when you do need 5 people, you might only have access to 4 people because that 5th person is no longer available. That 5th person might not even be alive themselves because life is not promised to you. And so you never know what people's situations are going to be. So you need to have a plan that is adjustable to what's going on in the life of yourself and your loved one that you're caring for. And you have to be very flexible. So I think if you have a conversation early on with the people that you think would work with you and be there for you, and maybe you might not need them but once every 2 weeks, but you can put them in the program so they get to know your loved one, they see it, it becomes a routine for them, and you set it up so that they are enjoying the care that they're giving when they had that responsible time to be there.
You mentioned the program. Now, in the book, you talk about having a plan, a caregiving plan. It's almost like a plan of action for the person whose health is declining and whose mental state is declining. I've observed that very often what happens, not only in my own family, but more in other people's families, especially the larger families, everybody is shocked that this has happened to the loved one. They expected the person to live to 150 years old. I can say I'm guilty of that. I really expected my grandmother to live to 150 years old because she was such a feisty individual. I just didn't believe that she'd ever die. And I think this happens in a lot of families. And what I've seen is that when there is a decline, doesn't matter how close a relative it is, there are people that just like back away. And there's usually one person steps up and does everything. That's my observation. And I'm wondering if that's unique or if that's common.
It's not unique. I think it's a little bit more common. But I also think that that person was already picked without them even knowing it from the person that has the dementia, because they start relying on a particular person that they feel that they can trust, whether the person lives with them or the person is there every day visiting. But there's some kind of connection that from the very beginning that person connects themselves to. And I think the other thing is that person that's been connected by the loved one is a little bit in denial about what's going on too in the beginning. They're in denial. So what they're doing is also helping to cover up certain things or making excuses for the behavior of the person.
Right. That's interesting. I think that also, I would imagine, and I'd bet dollars to donuts on that, is that probably a lot of the family looks at this particular loved one, and we're talking about dementia. So we know the person is usually older. They're in denial about the fact that the person's actually losing their cognitive abilities. It's painful to watch.
It's very painful.
And the first realization of it is just always so harsh. And, talk about a little bit about the guilt that comes, and that the caregiver and the person, and let's say that the loved one's not even gone yet, but they're around, but there's always this element of guilt, like I should have known, I should have done more. I mean, what do you do to prevent the burnout of the caregiver?
Well, I think that, like I mentioned last week, I think one of the issues that people are in denial about what they're seeing. And we as a group of people have to understand what is important about understanding just health in general. I think people do not understand what it means to be a caregiver, but in order to be a good caregiver, you have to educate yourself on all parts of your daily living and your health, because people don't understand the importance of going to the dentist, the importance of an annual physical. It's not just nutrition and exercise. It's a whole batter of things that need to be done to keep your health intact, and understanding how to advocate for yourself. Because when you do have to advocate for a loved one, you will be able to do it. You won't be trying to figure it out because you've been doing it for yourself. And so that's why I want people to become more educated on asking the right questions for themselves. Because even when you're the caregiver and you're going to the doctor yourself for your self-care, you need to be advocating for yourself and letting the doctor know, hey, I'm caring for someone. Are there certain things that I need to be doing differently? Maybe you've developed high blood pressure. Your doctor needs to know, you know what, I'm a caregiver. I'm under a certain amount of stress. The doctor's with you for 15 minutes, let's say every 6 months, maybe twice a year. He doesn't or she doesn't know what is going on in your life for 5 to 6 months. You have to tell him or her what's going on so they can make a very good evaluation. And then you have to be able to ask the right questions so you can get the right answers that fit for you.
I've seen situations where the caregiver has some kind of a medical problem themselves. It might be lupus or multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis. And then they're not stuck, but they're charged with the task of taking care of someone else. Now, what I saw in this other situation is that when the doctor of the loved one's doctor found out that the caregiver has a condition, what I observed in one particular case is that the loved one with dementia, their doctor saw to it that loved one is institutionalized for the sake of the survival of the caregiver. I did observe that, which I think is interesting. And I hope all doctors are that.
Because the diseases that you mentioned, those diseases, stress makes those diseases worse.
Oh, yeah.
With those particular diseases that you spoke about, they cannot have additional stress, because when you have stress, it can make your episodes with those diseases come more frequently, and they can be more damaging to you. So yes, you have to separate the stress of being a caregiver. And so I definitely understand why the doctor made that transition for the loved one. And you have to know too, when you are a caregiver, when to let go. You have to know when this is not working for you mentally and physically either. You might still have a couple of people on your team, but it still might not be the right situation for you because the way the person is declining. And they might need really, really strong 24-hour service. And even though you might have to put someone into an assisted living or a particular facility, you still have to be the advocate, and you still have the ability to be there all day and be involved in the activities, the feeding. You can make yourself more available to be within that situation with that person. And then you go home and regroup, and you can go see that person every day and still be a part of their life, but you have more of a balance of caregiving because someone is actually helping you with a lot of the physical caregiving. And the time that you are spending with that loved one is more of an enjoyable activity type setting as opposed to being stressed and constantly doing the physical care.
I think also what I've observed with some families and people is that with dementia, it's almost like they try to get the person, the loved one who has a dementia, to be normal. You know, they keep correcting them, even though they keep saying the same thing over and over again, and it could be wrong. And what I've observed, and I've worked around older people, you know, in a job, and I've had this situation in my family. I've learned that when you just let them be in that little world of theirs and don't try to argue with them about, no, there is not someone standing behind me, that kind of thing, or try to correct them on everything that they don't remember. It really alleviates you of the stress when you kind of surrender to it because you know you can't do anything else. I always wondered if that's the right way to handle it.
Right. You shouldn't be correcting them because they're going to keep repeating it, or they're going to keep asking the same question over and over, because you're right. Their memory, short-term memory, is not there. And you're just spending time agitating them. You want to move on, redirect them to something else, to a new activity, or a new program on TV, or something that you're doing, or something that they like.
So talk about activities, because in your book, you do talk about activities being the backbone of good caregiving, especially with people with dementia. So give the audience an idea of what you mean by that. What kind of activities do you set up, like a routine, something they can look forward to? If they're looking forward, most people with dementia live in the moment and in the past.
Yes. So they might not remember that today they played this particular game, or yesterday they played that particular game, but playing a particular game, or arts and craft, coloring, it really depends on where they are and the type of activity. Like, they might not be able to do the game sequence because they're declining, so that might not work for them. But checkers might work for them. Or Candyland might work for them, even though that's a child's game, it's still with colors, it still counts, it's very simple. And so you need to find out, as you're moving forward, which games work for that moment and what games that they love. Like Uno might work for a certain period of time in a certain phase of the dementia. And then you have to realize maybe just music and sitting and rubbing and holding their hands as they've declined even more because they're not capable of comprehending or remembering how to play a particular game. And that's why I have in the book, Care Plan, understanding your loved one, understanding their story, understanding who they are, so that as you are planning these activities, in the very beginning what works for them because you know who they are. And then as the disease is progressing, you're introducing new activities that might work with that particular stage of the dementia for them and their personality.
I find that music, I've
and that's one of the things I was getting ready to
right, no, I can segue.
Music is the key too.
Okay, tell me more about that. Like, what kinds of songs, lyrical things, is there anything in particular?
It's funny because a lot of times it's what, that's where I go into the care plan, understanding who that person is. Because if you really sit down and you really understand who that person is, that person might have been interested only in jazz or a particular music in a period of time. And so when you put that music on, they just light up. And they have such good memories and they have such a good time and they're not as agitated. Behavior is better. So that's why it's very important to know who your loved one is, on a different level than what you've always known them. You got to go into the back history of who they really are. Because maybe as they got older, they didn't have time to enjoy the things they enjoyed when they were younger.
Well, I have a friend that's a musician, and one of the kind of gigs she does is she goes to assisted living facilities and also senior residents. And she was working with a very sort of, I'd say, like very high end, very upscale people that were very wealthy. And one place in particular, and she brought me with her once to one of these gigs. These people, a lot of them were actually Broadway musicians, singers themselves, or in the music industry. And she has this, I guess, this repertoire of music that goes, I think, back into the 40s and comes forward into the 60s. And what I notice is the way they respond. She starts to sing it and they just join right in. And they form their little cliques there. And she'll sing these old songs like Heaven, I'm in heaven. And then they'll just join right in and know the words. And they're adorable, some of them. There's a group of women together. And then when they finish the song, they'd say, and then we wrote, and they come up with another song. And I saw that the music is very, very helpful, and so that's one thing that she does. And she, even though she's not at that age, I don't know how she knows all these songs and she knows all the words. And so do they, and I'm wondering in my generation going forward, I'm thinking, who are we going to want to hear? We're going to probably want to hear the Beatles and the Rolling Stones or Marvin Gaye.
Gaye, Motown.
Motown is big in our generation. Yes.
And the early hip hop.
Right. That's true. And hip hop, they have their own museum now for, we're like on the edge of that particular generation, but it's a music that kind of eclipses where we were, and we eclipse that, I guess, to an extent. But music, and why does music work so well?
I don't know. It's the rhythm. It's the sound. The music actually allows them to think into what was going on in their life. Because usually when you are listening to music, you're either at a location, you think of a location or a party that you were at or a time in your life that positive things were going on. And sometimes music can make you think of the negative things that were going on in your life too. But actually, that is something that people actually, I guess would say, they're thinking about it. And when you have dementia, you don't know where that mind is. You're trying to figure out where you're watching them, but you really don't know where they are mentally. They might not even recognize you every day, but they're recognizing their thoughts through the music.
Yeah, like you can walk in to someone that you know, a relative or whatever, and they might treat you like, oh, this really nice young lady came and visited me. And you're thinking, that's your daughter, or that's your granddaughter, But you would probably advise just be that person that they see you as.
Right.
I know my grandmother used to see me sometimes would call me by my mother's name, which I thought was sweet. And I didn't mind it. I kind of liked it. But, and I remember one time singing a song to her, just a little bit of it, that she sang to me when I was like a baby.
Right.
And she responded to that. It was interesting to see her response to that. And it's funny that I remember the song too. So music plays a special beneficial part in the life of the loved one and also with the family. So what is a caregiver, getting back to that, what does a caregiver do? Because I know that a lot of people that have been caregivers, they always feel like, if I had just done this differently, there's a guilt factor. There's such a strong emotional component. I've seen that addressed in hospice, at Calvary, where they actually give special therapy to the caregiver. They give the caregiver massages and
right. So when you're at a facility like that, they're engaging you into that activity. But when you're in home care, you have to be the one that engages yourself and be proactive, because you're the leader of the team, not only for yourself, but for the loved one. You can't depend on someone setting the stage for you. You have to set the stage for yourself. And that's when you talked about guilt. Do not feel guilty about taking time out for you to exercise, have a massage, have your hair cut, because you want to stay well groomed too. You don't want to look in the mirror every day and say, wow, I'm aging and I'm not taking care of myself. You need to be able to look in the mirror and say, I'm enjoying this. I've learned a lot. I'm getting to really know another person that I didn't know through this process.
Yeah, I think that I know that. And if you really don't know these things and you don't care for yourself, it will age you in dog years. It's astonishing how fast it happens. And then when it's all over and you look at yourself, you're like, oh my God, who is this woman? You know, and you have to sort of find your way back. When you're saying, in your book, you talk about different ways to avoid having that happen. I'll just say, in my opinion, I don't think it's good for the caregiver to visibly decline.
No.
Because they're just doing everything for this other person and nothing for themselves.
Right. And that's why you have to be able to put your team together so that you can be able to take those breaks when it's necessary. And also know when to take your breaks while you're being the caregiver during the day, even though your loved one is there and you don't have a team person there to relieve you to go out, but you still have time within the environment you're in to take time for yourself. And that's really that's why I talk about schedules. It's important to set up schedules early on, set up that structure, because they get used to having structure too. And so if you set it up for them to have that particular structure, you'll know when you will have your time for yourself. So maybe for 2 months, you might know every morning I put on a particular music or I have coloring. I don't have to sit with them to do that. But maybe 6 months from then, you got to change your activity. And maybe you might need a team person sitting with them during that time. So you have to be just as flexible, but you also have to know how to put a structured schedule together so that there is some flexibility within the schedule, but you're always thinking about yourself too. It's not one-sided.
Yeah, it's not one-sided. And you do talk about that quite extensively in the book. I'm just going to tell the audience, the book again is Caregiving with Love and Joy. I recommend it highly. And I think that it should be the kind of book that should just be on the shelf in everybody's home, because you never know when you're going to be put to task. You know, you just don't know. There's some things in life you cannot predict, but you want to make sure that the people that you love are taken care of. And I'm just going to end this particular interview this time because there's so much more to talk about. But you can get this book on Amazon.com, and it's also at Barnes & Noble bookstore. Get the book. And it's not like a dry, stiff, boring read. It's really interesting because you're going to find that you'll relate to a lot of the things that are discussed. And there's always someone in our lives. You never know. There's always, I'll say this, I shouldn't say always or never, but I believe, I'll bet dollars to donuts, I'll say it like that everybody knows someone that needs that kind of care, or that you can foresee it because you can probably see the decline. And Alzheimer's and dementia are here to stay for the time being until that miraculous cure comes around. So, Patricia, tell me quickly, what's next?
What's next for the book or for me?
Yeah, you should be doing a tour.
Well, that's what I plan to do. I want this to be a global conversation. So I am working towards making this a mindset globally, that people need to be aware of what it is to be a good, loving caregiver while they're in, so that they can enjoy it and that they are not feeling the stress or feeling they are, I don't want to say the word misused, but people feel these things when they're not having the joy of their life for themselves, and they need to learn how to balance it out. So that's my goal, learning how to balance it out, how to be a good advocate, and how to be a good caregiver at the same time.
And to avoid being burdened. I think that's the word you were looking for.
Yes, burden.
And, you have to think of it in terms of caring for the person who cared for you at some point in your life.
Right.
But so, Patricia, I'm going to have you back because I like this conversation. I went through the situation before you wrote the book. I knew you, but you hadn't written the book yet. I could have done very well with it. I'm just going to tell the audience that I recommend this book very highly. And I really believe it should be a staple in the home. You should have it in your home, on your bookshelf, or you should have it in your home next to your first aid kit. It's really important. Until the next time, though, I'll come back next time with another interesting guest. And I'm going to have Patricia Boswell back at some point, most definitely. And please, people, get that book. It's really good for you. You'll be glad you bought it. It's a great gift for anybody that's going through this because it gives you a solution to the problem. Very practical solutions and steps and formulas. Feels like you're getting the secret formula on what to do about the situation for a loved one with dementia. Okay, so I'm going to just wrap it up for now and come back next time, please. I always love bringing these people to you, and I just love talking to everybody that comes on the show. I'm really blessed to be able to know so many interesting people on this planet. So come back again, and I'll say bye-bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Energy Stoners Cafe.
Are you looking for an internet talk radio station for your podcast? Look no further. At the helm of Passionate World Talk Radio are two women that want to provide a spot for you and your podcast to be heard. There are many other places for your podcast, but PWTR has the audience. You will not be disappointed. Our station has been on the internet for the past 16 years. Call us for more information. 484-364-1032 or text Jeannie White, station manager at THECONNECTSHOW@gmail.com for podcast show details. Thank you for listening to Passionate World Talk Radio. You can listen to this program all over again by going over to https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. You can also hear it on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, AMFM247.com every Tuesday evening between 8 and 9 p.m. YouTube, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, and all the other podcast directories one can find on the internet.